Hey, good morning. It's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right. It's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching. Man, I sure do appreciate it also. And in addition to that as well, top 10 video time today. Sorry I didn't get this video out yesterday. If you watched the morning show yesterday, then you noticed it cut off abruptly at the end. My internet provider had scheduled maintenance for yesterday at 9 a.m. Now, I knew that. I had Pigskin Pete on the line as a guest yesterday on the show, and I just lost track of time, and it hit 9 a.m. before I realized it, and the stream died. And the internet was down most of the day yesterday, so I waited, and then Lou Jr. had soccer and whatnot. Anyway, none of that matters. The point is, I apologize for not getting this video out yesterday, but nevertheless, it's out today. And I'm going to try to get the SEC preview video out later today, too. So one day this week, there'll have to be 2 videos to get myself back on track. Maybe it'll be today, maybe it'll be tomorrow. We'll see. Speaking of the live show, here's the current live show schedule. I get a lot of comments on every day, really. When's the next live show? When's this? When's that? Here's the live show schedule. Okay, this is all the live shows I do all week long. The only thing not listed on here is the game streams that I do. Like last Saturday, I streamed all the noon games on YouTube from like 12 to 3:30, and then I streamed the Patreon games or the 3:30 games over on the Patreon page. This coming weekend, Saturday, Georgia-Florida game at 3:30, I'll be streaming that over on the Patreon page. So if you're a Patreon member, you know the routine. About 15 minutes before the game starts, just check the Patreon page. There'll be a link there. Click the link. It'll take you to the Georgia-Florida live stream. If you're not on the Patreon page yet and you want to join up, just click the link in the description of this video or any video that says support the channel and join the Patreon page. It will take you over there. You can get yourself signed up. All right, let's get to the top 10 here. I'm going to do it the same way we always do. I'll put last week's top 10 up on the screen so you guys know sort of where I was starting at last week, because my poll obviously differs from all the other polls out there, the AP, the coaches, whatever. So I always put last week's poll up so you guys see sort of my starting point heading into my decisions for this week's poll. The other thing I want to let you know about this week's poll is this. The college football playoff poll rankings start next week. They'll come out every Tuesday. Okay? This is my first playoff poll. There's not a huge difference in the way I do a playoff poll versus the way I do the top 10 poll during the rest of the season, but there are a few differences. I'll point those out at the top here and sort of as we go along. Every single team listed in my top 10 this week has a chance to make the playoffs. Every single one. Some are long shots. Some are almost guaranteed to make it based on their remaining schedule and who they play and the fact they're currently undefeated. But I think that every single team in this week's top 10, which is my first playoff poll, has a shot at getting into the playoffs at the end of the year. Some teams need help, whatever. I get that. But I think every team you're about to see listed in this top 10 poll at least can make a claim right now for a shot to get into the playoff if things go their way. Any team that I don't have in my top 10 this week, I don't think has a shot. So in other words, what I'm saying is, and this is the reason I decided to start my playoff poll this week, I think there are 10 teams left in college football that have a legitimate shot to get into the playoffs, and I think there's only 10. I don't think anyone listed or anyone not listed in this week's Uncle Lou Top 10 poll has any chance at all of making the playoffs, no matter what happens. Now, someone's going to point out some weird scenario in the comments section where total chaos and this team lose and this team lose and this team lose and this team lose. Well, whatever scenario you're trying to point out, that's not happening, okay? If you're not in this week's Top 10 Uncle Lou poll, you're not making the playoffs. I'm willing to bet on it. If anyone disagrees with me, email me. I'll work a bet out with you. But here we go. We're going to start at number 10, and we're going to work our way down. Now, there are going to be some changes in this week's top 10 poll because I'm considering this a playoff poll, okay? And this is the way these polls will work the rest of the year. Right now, there's 10 teams I think have a chance to make the playoffs. From here on out, some teams will get eliminated. Now, they may still end up in the top 10 after this week because there might not be 10 teams to have a shot to make the playoffs, but I'm going to have every team that I think still has a chance to make the playoffs ranked the highest in my poll, okay? So, and again, I'll explain some of that in a second, but here we go. I think it'll make more sense if we just start off and start doing it. I'm going to do number 10 and number 9 right now at the same time for you, okay? Number 10, Utah. Number 9, Oregon. I get it. I know the majority of college football fans don't think either one of those two teams is making the playoffs. I don't think they are either, but I think they have a chance. I do think they have a chance, and I don't think it's one of these total chaos scenarios that needs to happen in order for one of these two teams to get in, okay? Obviously, they would both have to win out in the regular season. They each have one loss right now. They would each have to win out in the regular season. These two teams would have to then meet in the Pac-12 title game, and the winner would be sitting there at 12-1 with a Pac-12 title. I think Oregon has a better shot because they have a better loss, in my opinion, than Utah has. But I think it's possible for either team to do it. They would need some help. But they got some of that help last weekend, right? Notre Dame lost last weekend, and Oklahoma lost last weekend. That completely eliminates Notre Dame from the equation. So if you're waiting to see Notre Dame in this top 10 poll, I'll just go ahead and tell you right now, they're not there. They're not in it. They're completely done. Oklahoma is not completely done. But one of the things that needs to happen for a Pac-12 team to get in is you've got to have at least one, probably multiple, 1 or 2 loss conference champions. So Oklahoma losing was a step in that direction. I'm not saying Oregon would get in over a one-loss Oklahoma. I'm saying it puts Oregon one step closer to getting in should Oklahoma lose another game or whatever. So I've got them at 10-9. What did Utah do last week? They beat Cal 35-0. Okay, I guess that's what you're expected to do. This week they play on the road at Washington. Washington's not a great team, but they're an above-average good team in the Pac-12. So they got to play on the road there. I don't think that game's a gimme. Washington has been sort of an up-and-down team this year. They've looked pretty good at times. They went toe-to-toe with Oregon, and then they've lost some games that leaves you scratching your head wondering how the hell they lose that game. But it's on the road. It would be a good win. Would it be a great win for Utah? No, but it would be a good win, I think. What is Utah's best 3 wins this season? Arizona State, Washington State, BYU. So no huge win. But again, I think if they run the table and are sitting at the end of the year with a Pac-12 title and a 12-1 record, they'll have a shot. Some other things have to happen. Some teams ahead of them would have to lose. I understand that, but I think a case can be made. Same scenario for Oregon, right? What they do this last week, they won 37-35 over Washington State. A little too close for comfort against an average, honestly, Washington State team. Who do they play this week on the road at Southern Cal? Southern Cal and Washington, to me, are similar teams. Southern Cal has played some games this season where they look pretty good. I mean, they beat Utah, for crying out loud. But then they've got some losses where you go, yeah, Clay Helton got to go. And I still think he's got to go, especially if you think you have a shot at Urban Meyer. We'll see what happens over the last month of the season here. But this isn't a gimme for Oregon on the road at Southern Cal. I expect Oregon to win the game. They've looked like the better team for most of the year. Oregon's best wins are what? Washington State, Stanford. So again, no standout wins. Lost a close one to Auburn on the road, which is hurting them. Perception matters in college football because it's a ranking and a poll system. There's just no way to eliminate perception. Is it fair? No, but college football by nature is not fair. And if we're being honest with ourselves, that's part of the reason we love it. That's part of the reason we're able to argue about college football year round and about who's better than who, because it's not a scientific, it's not objective. It's subjective. That's part of why we love it. But anyway, I've got Oregon at 10, or Utah at 10, Oregon at 9. For number 7 and 8, I use the same type of logic here, okay? I've got Georgia at 8, and I've got Florida at 7. Half the people are going to tell me Georgia's overrated and shouldn't be 8th. There's going to be just as many people who are going to tell me that about Florida and Utah and Oregon. And again, you might, I'll get to teams 11 through 15 in a minute. There's going to be people who say certain teams 11, 15 are better than teams 10 through 7. Again, they have no shot to make the playoff. This is a playoff poll. these 10 teams are your playoff contenders. That's just what it is. There's not a person alive who thinks that if Georgia or Florida, either one, run the table and are sitting there with an SEC title at 12-1, that they'll get left out of the playoffs. Nobody thinks that, and it wouldn't happen. Any team that wins the SEC with one loss is getting in 100% without question. I would make the argument that a two-loss SEC champion would get in, but we're not going to have a two-loss SEC champion this year because whoever wins this weekend between Florida and Georgia will not lose another game in the regular season, in my opinion. Whoever it is, whether it's Georgia or Florida, whoever wins this weekend, that team is going to enter the SEC title game sitting on one loss, most likely against an undefeated Auburn or Alabama or LSU. So that's just what it is. Georgia and Florida were both off last week. What's their best wins? Georgia, Notre Dame, Kentucky, Vandy. No, Notre Dame is a good win. It was a great win at the time. It's not a great win now. It's a good win. Kentucky, Vandy, and neither one of those were really impressive wins. Vandy 30-6, but Georgia didn't score a single touchdown in the second half. Kentucky 21-0, but they didn't score to the third quarter. No passing yards in that game. Florida, their best win, Auburn. Probably on par with the Notre Dame win. Maybe a little bit better than the Notre Dame win, maybe, but it's close. South Carolina, Miami, those probably their three best wins. Of course, they play Georgia this week. And again, this is a huge game. I don't expect this to be a blowout. I'm going to talk plenty about this game over the course of the week. I don't think Georgia's winning this game by 20 points like they did last year. I don't think they're winning it by 35 points like they did the year before. I do think Georgia can win the game. I do think Florida can win the game. Georgia's favored by 5 or 6, depending on where you look. It's a little strange. Georgia's played its worst 2 games of the season heading into this game. If they didn't figure some things out in the bye week, I think Florida will probably win. If Georgia comes out like they've done the last couple of years, where after their, if you look at Georgia the last couple of years, after their worst game of the year, Auburn 2017, LSU 2018, they played their best football after that. Georgia hasn't lost a game in November in a long time. In 2016, they finished the season hot the last few years. They got to keep that going. Florida's looking to win the East for the first time in a couple of years. Both teams are good. Both teams have a legitimate shot to make the playoff if they win out. That starts this week with the cocktail party. One of these teams will likely be out of the top 10 next week. One of these teams will likely be moving up in the top 10 next week. And like I said, whoever wins this game, I don't see them losing. I think Georgia's got a tougher road even after this game than Florida does. But whoever wins this game, I think will win out in the regular season. So that's 10, 9, 8, and 7. Number 6, I've got OU. I know they lost, and in all the other polls, they dropped a lot lower than this. And if I was doing just a regular top 10 poll like I've been doing from week to week, I would have Oklahoma lower here. But look at their schedule. I think they're the least likely to lose another game of any team I have listed above them, right? In my opinion. They had to play Baylor, but then, maybe Baylor again in a Big 12 title game. I'm up in the air on Baylor. I'll be honest. They're undefeated. They would be 11 if I was doing a top 11. And I know, Baylor's an undefeated Power 5 team in November, and I'm saying they don't have a shot to make the playoff. I just feel that way. That's the one team, though, I could be wrong on. If Baylor runs the table somehow, I think it would be hard to keep them out. I just don't think they will run the table. And even if they have one loss, I think they will get left out. And this is where the perception comes in. And again, I'm not saying it's fair, but that would be a good scenario for an Oregon or a Utah, especially Oregon, I think. I think a one-loss Oregon Pac-12 champ would get into the playoffs over a one-loss Baylor. It'll be argued, and I don't think there's a clear-cut answer right now either way on what would happen. That's obviously just an opinion I have. If it came down to the committee trying to decide on the fourth team and the two options they had were a one-loss Oregon Pac-12 champ and a one-loss Baylor Big 12 champ, I think they would give the nod to Oregon, but we'll see. But again, That's where the perception comes in. But I've got OU at 6 because I think they will beat Baylor. I don't think they'll lose another game. I don't think it matters who they play in the Big 12 title game. I think Oklahoma will finish at 12-1. I don't think it's a guarantee they get into the playoffs at 12-1, though. They may be sitting there at 5th, 12-1. Maybe it's going to come down to them and probably a second SEC team. Worst case scenario for Oklahoma, of course, is going to be if the SEC East wins the SEC. If a one-loss Florida or a one-loss Georgia beats an undefeated Alabama or an undefeated LSU, what does the committee do with Oklahoma? That will be interesting to watch and see. If we look at what's happened in years past, Oklahoma will get left out because that's a bad loss. So we'll see. But we'll see. We'll just have to wait and see. But I've got them at number 6 because I feel like out of teams 10 through 6, I feel like Oklahoma is least likely today to lose another game for the rest of the season. Now, whoever wins between Georgia and Florida, because Oklahoma is off this week. They don't play, okay? Whoever wins between Georgia and Florida will be ahead of Oklahoma in my playoff poll next week. I'll just go ahead and tell you that. Whoever wins between Georgia and Florida, that's going to be a good win. Oklahoma's sitting home watching. They're going to get jumped in my poll by one of those two teams, period. I'm just letting you know now so you don't have to cry when it happens next week, okay? But I've got Oklahoma at 6. Top 5 time, no surprise who the 5 teams are. They're the 5 major undefeated Power 5 teams. Again, Baylor and Minnesota are currently undefeated. I don't expect either one of them to make a playoff. I just don't. Could I be wrong on that? Yes, but I doubt it. Okay. So I've got the 5 big boys that are left. No surprise who they are. It's just a matter of putting them in a particular order, right? I have Penn State at 5. Penn State has surprised me this year, and I will admit they are a much better team than I gave them credit for in the offseason. I said a bunch of times in the offseason, I don't think Penn State can make a run this year. I think they're in sort of a transitional year, and I made it very clear that I did not think it was a rebuilding year, that it was a transitional year. And to me, there is a difference. They're loaded with talent, but some of it was young, and I didn't feel like they needed to rebuild, but I thought, maybe they lose 2 or 3 games this year, and then 2020 would be the year that they maybe go on some kind of a run to threaten to win the Big Ten. But obviously they're doing it now. They're undefeated. They've got some good wins, Michigan State, Michigan, and Iowa. Those are all 3 quality wins. No denying it. They just beat Michigan State this past weekend, 28-7. They're on a bye week this coming week. Everyone is waiting on the Penn State-Ohio State game. Penn State's got some other tough games between then or in addition to the Ohio State game, but that, of course, is the marquee game left in the Big Ten that a lot of people are pointing towards. We'll see what happens there, but I've got them at number 5 in my first playoff poll. And then the top 4, if the season ended right now, this is who I would have in the playoffs, and this is how I would have it seeded. Clemson 4. This really isn't Clemson's fault that I have them 4. They've blown out the majority of the teams they've played with the exception of the North Carolina game. But listen, here's the thing. Clemson played a terrible game against North Carolina, a team that I don't think is very good. But they won. That has to matter. Look at Georgia. Georgia played a terrible game. Everything went wrong against South Carolina, and Georgia lost. That has to be like, it has to matter that you actually win or you actually lose. So, I get it that you're looking at Clemson's best wins and you're going, what, Texas A&M, North Carolina, Florida State, Louisville, I understand. Clemson can only play the teams that are on their schedule. They got South Carolina coming up. They got a few, anyway, they got a few teams. But they play Wake Forest? Yeah, we'll see. But the point is, I don't have Clemson at 4 because of anything they've done wrong. I have Clemson at 4 because I think the 3 teams ahead of them have done more. That's it. It's not anything wrong with Clemson. And the goal should be to get into playoffs. If you're worried about seeding, where your team is seeded in the playoffs, then you don't have much confidence or faith in your team. That's how I look at it. I don't think anyone should really care whether they get seeded 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th. It shouldn't matter where you get seeded. It shouldn't matter who you get matched up to play. If you feel like your team is good enough to make the playoffs and win it all, then that means you think your team can beat anybody anywhere on any given day, and it shouldn't matter whether you're ranked first, second, third, or fourth, in my opinion. But if the playoffs ended today, I would have Clemson in the playoffs at the 4 seed. Number 2 and number 3 would be 2 SEC West teams, Bama and LSU. Now, obviously, they play each other, not this coming weekend, but the weekend after. Clemson plays Wofford this week, by the way. So, they're not likely to move up, and they're not likely to fall in next week's poll based on who they're playing this week and the fact that all 3 teams ahead of them have bye weeks. So none of the teams ahead of them are going to lose. Bama and LSU are both off before their huge matchup the following week, right? Bama last week beat Arkansas 48-7. It seems like they beat everybody by about that same score. Their best wins are Duke, Texas A&M, South Carolina. So no huge marquee win, but they've got their chance. They've got LSU coming up at home. They've got Auburn on the road, and then they're going to play either a top 10 Georgia or a top 10 Florida team in the SEC title game. So right now, Alabama's strength of schedule is not amazing, but by the time the SEC championship game is over, it will be if they're there, because they will have played LSU, Auburn, and either Georgia or Florida. So it'll be a quality schedule at that point. There's just no denying that. LSU has better wins than Bama, and that's the only reason I've got LSU ahead of Bama right now. It's not a punishment of Bama, just like it's not a punishment of Clemson for doing anything wrong. Bama and Clemson haven't done anything wrong, but anybody with any college football sense can look at LSU, Bama, and Clemson and see that LSU has some better wins. Again, that's not Bama or Clemson's fault. That's the way the schedule has laid out for the teams so far. So I'm not punishing Alabama and Clemson, but you have to reward teams, I think, for beating good teams, and LSU has done that. They beat Auburn this past weekend 23-20. Auburn's a top 15 team, I think. They beat Texas. Texas is a top 25 team. They beat Florida. They've got a handful of really good wins. They have the best resume without question of any team in the top 10, right? Well, why don't you have them number 1? Well, I don't have them number 1 because I think Ohio State is just clearly the best team up to this point this season in all of college football. That's no secret. If you've been watching this channel, I've had Ohio State number 1 in my poll for almost a month now. They appear to have no weaknesses, and each of the other top 3 or 4 teams maybe don't have weaknesses, but they have all had games where either the offense or the defense or both didn't play that well. Ohio State has not had that. Ohio State has been dominating offensively and defensively every single game that they've played. They beat Wisconsin this past week 38-7. A lot of people have been pointing at that game for 3 or 4 weeks, waiting to laugh at Justin Fields. And now here they are looking at the Ohio State schedule, trying to point even further down the road to another team where they might be able to laugh, because it didn't happen against Wisconsin. 200 yards, 3 touchdowns, puts them at 33 touchdowns for the year. Unbelievable. Heisman candidate quarterback. They've got the best player in all of college football and defensive end, Chase Young. The guy is absolutely unblockable. I mean, it was one of the best defensive performances I have ever seen this past Saturday for Chase Young against Wisconsin. It was unreal to watch. They've beat Cincinnati, and some of you are laughing. Cincinnati's a 1-loss group of 5 team. They're a top 20 team. They blew them out 42-0, I think it was. They beat Michigan State. That's not a great win. Michigan State does have a pretty good defense, but their offense is just abysmal. So I think that's an okay win, not great. D'Antonio, I think, is probably getting fired into this year. They blew out Wisconsin 38-7. That is a good win. You're going to say, well, they lost to Illinois. I get that. That's unexplainable. I'm not here to make excuses for Wisconsin, but Wisconsin is a really good team. Ohio State just absolutely dominated them on both sides of the ball, winning 38-7 this past weekend. They blew out Indiana. What is Indiana? A 2-loss team. So again, not a great team, but I think you would have to put them in the good category. So they've got some good wins. LSU has the best wins, but Ohio State to me has just looked like the most complete team in all of college football, week in and week out. It's no one factor that I look at to determine where I place any one of these teams somewhere in the poll. I try to look at as much as I can and take all different kinds of things into account and into consideration. But this is where I land today. If the playoffs were to start tomorrow, I would have Ohio State versus Clemson. and LSU versus Bama would be your 2 round 1 games. Obviously, this is not going to stay the same week in and week out. LSU and Bama are playing in a couple of weeks. You've got 6 of my top 10 play each other. 8 of the top 10. Is that right? Yeah. 8 of my top 10 teams play each other. Utah and Oregon play in the Pac-12 title game, most likely. Georgia and Florida play this weekend. That's 4 teams. Alabama and LSU play in 2 weeks. That's 6 teams. And Ohio State and Penn State play in a couple of weeks. Plenty of time left. Plenty of room to shake things up here in this poll. But this is where I have it this week. All right, let me know down below where I got things wrong. Keep in mind this is a playoff poll. So I know Baylor's undefeated. If you wanted to make just a regular poll and put Baylor 10 or 9, I can't argue that. Okay, but this is a playoff poll. I don't think Baylor's making the playoffs. That's why they're not in my top 10. These are the 10 teams I think have a shot. I mentioned that at the top. Minnesota, I don't think they're making the playoffs, and I honestly don't think Minnesota's a top 10 team anyway. SMU and App State are a group of 5 teams. I don't see them getting any higher than 11 or 12. I'm just going to be honest. UCF had to have 2 amazing years in a row just to get up to number 8. I don't think SMU or App State is getting into the top 10 this year. Just my opinion. 1-loss teams. Cincinnati, they're not making the playoffs. Boise State, nope. Wake Forest, sorry, no. Memphis, no. San Diego State, no. Those are your 1-loss teams. Every other 1-loss team is in my top 10. 2-loss teams trying to sneak in the back door. Auburn, no. Already got 2 losses. They got to play Alabama and Georgia. They're not winning either of those games. They're definitely not winning both. I know you're going to point at 2017. There's a reason people talk about 2017 all the time and point that out all the time, and it's because it's rare. It's because it was an amazing feat and not one that's likely to be repeated anytime soon, including this year. So the barn is out. Michigan is out. I'm sorry. You got too many losses already. You still have to play Ohio State. You're out. Notre Dame, 2 losses and no conference championship game. You're out. Wisconsin, terrible loss to Illinois, and now a second loss. A blowout. Not to a good team, but still you were blown out. You're out. You're gone. You're probably not even going to win the division. Okay, you got to count on Minnesota. You got to beat Minnesota and count on them hopefully losing another game. So you're not getting in. Iowa, stop it. Not getting in. Kansas State, you're not getting in. I'm sorry. Congratulations. Great win over the covered wagons. You're not getting into the college football playoff. So that's it. Those are all the undefeated teams, the 1-loss teams, and all the 2-loss teams. Okay? If you're not in Uncle Lou's top 10 right now, you're not getting into the playoffs. Have a good morning.